We're going to go to Reuben now. Kia ora, Reuben. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Kia ora whānau. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pretty hard act to follow that one, but I'll do my best. Presentations along the similar lines of Brownie's around what we observed and recorded during our field work on land. So sorry, I should make this really clear to everybody. Brownie's assessment looks at the moana, we look at the whenua and the environment around the Te Puni stream in terms of our assessment. So I'll just talk you through in the first instance what we surveyed, then I'll talk you through what we found, and then I'll talk you through some key mitigation and management measures that we're proposing with regards to that. So, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to try and share a screen, so we'll see how this goes. Are you able to view a figure of the whenua at your end?
Yes.
Yep, nice and clear, Reuben.
Ka pai. So I guess basically the way that I talked at the hui at Hene Rupe is we've sort of broken the whenua down to some zones in terms of our assessment and thinking. So I'll talk you through those zones in a minute, but when we went out on site, we were looking at vegetation, we were looking at bats, we were looking at birds, lizards, fish, and those were the main areas of focus. So when I talk about those zones, we've got our excuse me, we've got our wetlands that everybody's familiar with, these coastal wetlands. We've got this, what I refer to as the coastal wetland. We've got the airstrip wetland sitting in behind it, and then we've got other sort of, I guess, sporadic wetland type habitat adjoining the Te Puni stream, Karakatawhiro River environment there. Then we've got these gravel dune systems. Excuse me for one moment. Can you guys please go away?
Do you want to hand up?
Sorry, I'm trying to look after my tamariki today, so it's a bit challenging. So yeah, then we've got this back dune environment comprising gravel dune ridges and swales. And then, as I mentioned before, we've got this Te Puni stream and riparian zone through here, which ultimately joins into this little estuary system with the Karakatawhiro River. So those are our basic sort of environments. So now I'll just talk you through what we saw. So with regards to these wetland systems, the coastal wetland and the airstrip wetland, we found a number of native plant species, including raupo and harakiakea, and a selection of other freshwater reeds and sedges. The water sources for those wetlands is, unsurprisingly, from the groundwater. It's the groundwater migrating from the Raukumara's ranges down towards the Moana, and really that water within the wetlands is a surface expression of that groundwater system. From there, the water we believe flows both into the river and out into the coast as well. So in terms of the vegetation, I talked through that, what we observed. What we can say is we didn't see any rare or threatened wetland vegetation species in our work. We then turned to looking for animals, and we did find lots of tuna within those wetlands. Interestingly enough, we found one really large inanga in this coastal wetland, and we think that that's basically been landlocked into that wetland system from a time when the awa was in flood and was migrating further eastwards through that wetland system. In terms of the gravel dunes, is another zone that I referred to before. in summary, it's been assessed as largely low-grade pasture. There are some scattered areas of native mid-dune species, but there's also lots of introduced species such as gorse and cotoneaster. There weren't any freshen plant species, and anything that was indigenous there was incredibly degraded from all the stock pressure that's been exerted on it over the years. In terms of the animals that live in those dune systems, we did observe shore skink. Our best, and where we observed them was in exposed gravel mounds, which typically sit on top of the gravel dune ridges. Our preliminary estimate is that 10 to 25% of the area which would be excavated for the mooring basin in here, and this connection between the dredge channel and the foredune, somewhere in here, would be occupied by these shore skinks. Turning to the Te Pone stream environs, as I talked about before, that's essentially an old course of the Karukatawhiro River. We found lots and lots of indigenous fish in that stream. And we went looking for bats also within the kaihikatea and other taller vegetation that sits along that riparian zone. And I should mention that in terms of those survey methods, there was a combination of observations on site. There's a combination of UAV or drone footage. There was a combination of fishing for those fish species. And most importantly, we put out dozens and dozens of acoustic monitoring devices to record essentially the call of rare and threatened birds and bats. So it's a more sort of, I guess, modern and accepted technique now that you supplement your visual observations with actually putting devices out for weeks and weeks to monitor for those species. So we didn't find any bats in that corridor. They typically, I'm not a bat expert, but I'm told that they typically, by our bat expert has told me that they typically traverse these stream corridors, and that's why that was a focus area. In terms of the coastal habitat, this is an area where we interface with Brioni's work. She talked before within her kōrero around the stuff. So we'll take the technical jargon out of it. The part of the moana that's always wet, that's not affected by the tide. And then she talked about the part of the moana that wets and dries. And so our line, if you like, was seaward of that line that wets and dries. So we covered the upper beach face landward, and as part of that, we did eDNA sampling for all sorts of things, and with a specific focus on a gravel sand maggot, because that had been identified by Hal Havel and others as a particular species that might inhabit the area. And that eDNA sampling and analysis showed that those gravel maggots don't live in the area. I think last but not least, in terms of the species that are in the area, they comprise shorebirds as well, but from our observations, which is unsurprising, they tend to all roost down around the awa in terms of the outlet there in the estuary system. So from those, again, you know, tautoko with what Brownie said, we're very much in the middle of writing up our assessment at the moment. So the purpose of today was to share some early results rather than provide too much whakaaro around exactly what all this means. But what we have identified is there will need there will need to be some mitigation developed for some of the impacts on these species that we've observed. And there'll also, which I'll talk to in a second, but importantly, there'll also need to be mitigation, which we've already conceptualized, around making sure that the excavation of the mooring basin doesn't draw down the water level in the adjacent wetlands. So in simple terms, that's just sealing those vertical walls in the mooring basins so that they aren't permeable and the groundwater can't draw down into them. What we did find, sorry, I skipped over this. What we did find in terms of those automated monitoring devices that we left out in the field for several weeks was that Australasian bittern or mataku do live in the coastal wetland and also the airstrip wetland. And so we're in the process at the moment of developing some mitigation around how the construction noise can be managed so as not to have a detrimental effect on that. And we're confident that in the long term, those tonga will be the sensitivity to the ongoing operation of the proposal, should it go ahead, would be low, because in all reality, the amount of noise that those aggregates make getting swashed around by the constant wave action is probably just as disturbing to them as the boat and vehicle traffic within it. So in terms of other mitigation, we did talk about the shore skink as a sensitive species. And so our preliminary thinking there is that they'll need to be relocated from these areas within the back dune system, which require excavation. And to facilitate that, we're proposing to actually build some more, in simple terms, build some more habitat for them westward of the scheme within the gravel dune system, with a lot more of these mounds that they like to bask on. In terms of the stream environment, we talked to fish there and lots of tuna in particular. As you can see from this figure, the only real development, if you'd like to call it that sort of interacts with that part of the whenua and the awa is an access road. So similar to Brione's korero before about ensuring that those longshore sediment transport processes aren't interrupted by the breakwaters, our thinking here is that road crossing across the Te Pone stream would be bridged, and that way the riparian habitat and the species that migrate up and down that waterway would only be affected in a negligible manner. So I think in summary, Mr. Chair, that's kind of the key highlights and takeaways from our work today. I guess now I'll be more than happy to answer any partai that have come in. Sorry, I haven't been monitoring the chat. I was leaving that to you, Mr. Chair.
We haven't had any questions for you at the moment. Any questions from the panel?
Just low mitigation requirements, not significant. Sure. Just saying those mitigations you talked about are not major. They're within the scope of kind of classified as low mitigation requirements. You can hear that.
He's frozen up.
He's frozen up.
I think sort of a greater sensitivity and abundance of taonga species, where the proposal was to be cited is at the least sensitive end of the whenua, because I guess unsurprisingly, a lot of those higher values sit down around the Te Pone Stream, Karakara Whiro, sort of western edge of the whenua. So yeah, I think if I was to highlight the sort of key areas of focus for us in terms of making sure the terrestrial environment's cared for, it's really about the skink and the Australasian bittern, and the preliminary thinking around those mitigation measures is yes. I think insofar as the skink management approach is going, that's fairly standard. We're used to seeing that on infrastructure projects. Insofar as the drawdown of the water table potential adjacent to wetlands, that's also fairly standard practice to manage those water interfaces with structures. And I think the mitigation management measure around the Australasian bittern and their sensitivity to construction management disturbance, we're still working on that, so I can't really categorize that as a I guess there's a big deal or not at this time. Sorry.
You're on mute. Kingston.
We've had nothing come through for you on chat at the moment, Reuben.
So you must have stunned them all, Mr. Chairman. But Reuben, you spent a little bit of time there doing all of those things that you've just covered off. And so from our point of view, I mean, we were keen to answer a lot of questions, and particularly around the environment and culture and marine. So we've had good coverage this morning. So thanks very much for doing that. But we will have published reports coming in the next couple of weeks that we can put online so that people can read them at their leisure. So that's going to happen.
Absolutely. There's a range of reports sort of been finalised and about to be finalised. And then in January, there'll be even more reports available. And I think, you know, my understanding of the kaupapa today was the land and marine-based ecology reports are sort of well advanced, but not really in a position to sort of be released this side of Christmas. And so one of the purposes of this hui was to sort of talk about some of the key observations that we're starting to see through those reports.
So post the our publishing of the reports, so they'll then so we can get you back in to have another corridor just in case our people want to ask some more detailed questions or want to have time to actually go over, because they're quite dense reports. Even from our point of view, I mean, they're from an observational point of view, they're quite positive. But it's really getting the details through so that we can publish them, and then anybody who wants to ask questions. One of the things that over the last year or so is that we've had lots of questions around the marine environment, around the culture, around the environment generally. And I think what heartens us is that we've spent some time, as we promised back in November last year, to do impact assessments, and so we're reaching the end of that. So the timing of this, I mean, we would have loved to have had the face-to-face hui in Te Aroha, but COVID prevented that. So getting you online, thank you for that. Thanks to Bryony. But it really, we can get those results through, publish the reports, give people time to work their way through them, and then they can come back to us via our working group. And then we can have, we may have some more questions, but yeah, awesome.
Ka pai, Richard. I think, I just tautoko what Bryony said. We I am very open to further korero with anybody on this. So I, provided it's through the appropriate channels, let's just keep that korero flowing. And like you said, hopefully the silly bug leaves our shores soon, and we can all get back ki te kanahi and exchange ideas. But yep, I think it is a lot of technical work, and there's a lot of technical language in these things. So at some point, I think it might be useful for these documents to be summarized into sort of like one-page highlight type documents written in a language that can be easily understood by all. I think that would be highly beneficial for everybody on this call.
Thanks, Reuben. I think if Michelle were online, she had trouble with her data this morning, or with her contact, her communications, so she's not online. But I think she'd agree, because that's one of the jobs that she's had, to try to take the information back out to the community as our, part of our community relationship thing. So going forward, yeah, certainly we'll look forward to doing that.
Have got a question for you, Reuben, and it is, what is your view on the potential overall of this project?
Aroha Mai Kingston, can you just read that back to me again?
What is your view on the overall potential of this project?
Well, I won't wade into things that are outside my area of expertise, but I think summary version is that I think there's potential to accommodate a proposal along the lines of what's being presented here, and still care for the tile. I think there's potential for the project to create a little bit of impetus for other environmental enhancement projects on Te Remu Trust land, and also other components of the community and natural environment. So I think that for me, that's the heart of the issue, is finding a way, and I believe there is a way, to realise that potential and balance a sensible, respectful proposal with the tile.
Kia ora. Thank you. Well, we don't have any questions for you, Reuben, but thank you for making yourself available this morning to give us that summary overview of what's been done to date. I just have a comment here from Tuatara to you. They would like to thank you for your korero. It's a lot to take in all at once. Once they have read thoroughly the reports, they'll respond then. So that's from so just want to thank you, Reuben, for taking time out this morning to speak with us.
Thank you all for listening. And would you like me to hang on for another little while, Mr. Chair, or do you think that the pātai have finished now?
I think most people are probably going to wait for the final reports and take time to digest them and to fully understand them, and then have a more informed response to those reports. So if you want to leave, that's kei te pai.
Ngā mihi kia koutou, ka kite anō.
Kia ora, tēnā.